Well, good evening, brothers and sisters and friends. If you remember last week, we left off with Tattenai the governor and Shishar-bozenai both shaken in their boots because their plan had somehow gone completely out the window. And they were waiting for the reply from Darius Hestaspes. And when they received it, they had no alternative but to act. We see in that particular slide, then Tattenai the governor on this side, Shishar-bozenai and their companions, according to that which Darius the king had sent, so they did speedily. And the elders of the Jews builded, and they prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. And they builded and finished it. And when we take a look at that stage, we have to realize just what these brethren had actually come from and what they had gone through, the changes that had occurred with them, and how they now were at this particular stage of the building. So, when we consider just how they had changed from coming out of Babylon, going through to the land, instantly making an altar, and then waiting some 7 months because they were in fear of the people, and then allowing the people to antagonize them. But it took the courage of the prophets instructed by God to give them encouragement so that they were therefore steadfast. And if we look at what God had told them to do, because they were not considering his house, and because they were considering only the things that was of interest to them, he said, I want you to turn to me, and then I will turn to you. And then he gives them encouragement by saying, I am with you, don't fear. He says that I will strengthen you. And he says that I will give you encouragement. And what I want is I want you to have resolve. Because my prophets are rise up early, and they ascend them, and they come to you, and they preach to you, and they tell you the wonderful words of prophecy. They tell you my words to uplift you and realize that this is all in my plan but purpose and for my fulfillment of my law. So, just by that brief reading we did tonight, what we take out of it is this, is that God's word must work in our lives. It is the theme that runs throughout this entire 3 books. And you'll see tonight just how the same lessons just keep coming over and over and over. Because God has long patience and he has mercy. And sometimes we as human beings, we are inclined to think that when we pray and we ask God for guidance and we ask God for help, that we expecting a lightning bolt to come out of the sky and for it to happen instantaneously. But God doesn't work like that. There's no time restraint with God. He knows the beginning from the end. He says, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Before me there was none else, neither will there be after me. And so we see that in Ezra chapter 6, that the children of Israel which were come again out of captivity, and all such as had separated themselves unto them from the filthiness of the heathen of the land, to seek Yahweh God of Israel, did eat, and kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy. For Yahweh had made them joyful. And he had turned the heart of the king of Assyria unto them, to strengthen their hands in the work of the house of God and the God of Israel. And then almost the next verse starts off with, now after these things, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra the son of Sariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah. Now it's at this point in time that you will see the significance of the painstaking effort that I took in the first talk, as laborious as it may have seemed, to actually put out the timeline, just how significant and how apparent it is to understanding and to get a better flow of how the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther fit together. Because from that point, from the end of that verse 22 of chapter 6 to verse 1 of chapter 7, there is a 58-year break. 58 years. So what we are going to do is we are actually going to be stepping into the time frame of that 58 years. And we're going to be starting off with Darius Hystaspes. And then it goes through and we do the countdown until such time as we get to the actual time frame that we are actually referring to. Because the time frame, which is the discussion of this evening, which is involving Xerxes, or as we know him, Ahasuerus, is in Esther chapter 1. And you'll see that in that time frame it says to you, now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him. You could almost say this was a very big sales pitch on his behalf. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty, many days, even 180 days, he was saying, I'm powerful. He was selling himself to the princes. He was saying, come with me. He was saying, I'm the kind of man that you need in this seat of authority. It's grease or bust. He's saying that you need to put your trust in me. I have a very, very strong disposition. He says, I can handle all the affairs of this country. Look at what we have, he says. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. He's telling the people, I'm generous. This is the kind of person that you want, because I am Xerxes. That's who I am. And he takes it one step further, according to Herodotus. He says, I am the great king. Unbeknown to Xerxes, that name I am had already been booked by the great God of heaven. And so he immediately goes on his political campaign as one man. Remember, Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and all the people, they came to Jerusalem and they all worked and all shouted as one man. History is repeating itself. Here Xerxes, as one man, is impressing his voters. What he's trying to do is trying to sway the princes to be his companions in a military campaign. And what he's doing is he's trying to explain to them that there's nobody that can stand before them. This country needs to be back where it used to be. After Darius, Hystaspas, his father, lost the battle against the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon. And he's basically saying to them, I want you to stand with me. And you know, it's interesting that everything was going according to plan. He had sold himself in the most perfect way to all the princes. But there was just one more thing that he had to do. One more fine detail that he needed to impress to show his majesty and to show that he was worthy of the position that he held. And that was that on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 chambermaids that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti, the queen, before the king, with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was very fair to look upon. So you can just imagine it. Like the perfect salesman. Look at it. Look at my power. Look at my wealth. I'm the right man for the job. You know, we're going through political campaigns at the moment. That's all we hear. It's almost a dead ringer, because he's saying that I'm the man. Yes, I'm in power. But there was a little bit more to it, because what he was doing was he was trying to encourage them to support his next request. And so he asks for Vashti to come out. Now, this is actually very interesting, because amongst all the scholars and historians, there is this little idiosyncrasy. And basically what they say is that there has been various arguments as about whether she was called to wear only her crown. And the queen regards this request to appear before the drunken mass, clothed or not, as damaging to her honor. It's interesting that when his heart was merry, and given his lack of humility, given his absolute arrogance, it is possible. But then there are other commentators which say, no, that's not quite the case. There's no evidence to substantiate that. Whether it was the case or not is the fact that she was not prepared to actually bow to his demands in that particular case. There is the other aspect that she was pregnant at the time, because we know that Artaxerxes, when he comes into power, he was the stepson of Esther. So it could well have been the fact that, well, she was pregnant and she just didn't feel like entertaining all the drunken rabble that was inside the other hall. However, she ran into 3 big problems. First of all, she refused a man. Second of all, she refused a husband. And third of all, she refused the king. And fourth, and this is the big one, is that she humiliated the king in front of all the people that he was trying to impress. You know, he was a spontaneous person. He was known for his extreme outbursts of anger. He was known for making rash decisions. He was known for, at all costs, living in the lap of luxury. He was a very generous person, but he was also a very cruel person. And so he disposes of Vashti, and the moment he does that, pretty much he would have been able to turn around and say, okay, look what I've done. I've even disposed of the queen. I don't take no for an answer. I'm the kind of man you need. And so straight away, it's back into the military campaign mode. Now I'm giving you this background because I believe historical background is very important when actually understanding just the motivation behind this. So We come to this map. Now, this is one of the reasons why this was an obsession for Xerxes. Because his father, Darius Hystespus, had lost in the battle of Marathon there. That's where he had lost. He'd gone there, he was humiliated, and he retreated. And on the way back to Persia, he died. Now some say that, well, he died of sickness. Most say he died as a result of a wound which he had obtained in battle. Either way, this was the opportunity Xerxes wanted. He wanted revenge. He had an axe to grind. He was determined to smash those Greeks at all cost because they had humiliated the Persian Empire. He was going to take them and he was going to rub their noses in it. And he was going to reclaim the glory that his father could not achieve. And so doing, he would put Persia back on top of the shelf. So what he does is, through the cooperation and wooing all the princes and getting all the people behind him, he masses a massive army. Now this is where there's a little bit of discrepancy with regards to the historians as such. But according to the various different views on it, his total army was approximately 5 million. That's bigger than the population of New Zealand. When he actually decided to move, because of the logistics of it, he took between most 60% roundabout, say 300,000. The other 40% say as much as 900,000 troops. In fact, Herodotus says that the army was so large that when the infantry arrived at a river and they camped overnight, they drank the river dry. That's how many soldiers there were. So what he does is, he starts moving the army, and he had already made the statement that he would build a bridge at this spot here, which is Hellespont. And he would build a bridge using boats. And then from that point onwards, his army would march going towards the mainland of Greece. And city after city fell. In fact, a lot of the cities actually just surrendered without even a fight. When they just saw the sheer size of the army, they were terrified. Okay? But what happens is he stops at Thermopylae. And he stops there for 4 days. And the reasons will be shown to you in a minute. Because he was gathering his forces, plus he was synchronizing the actual forces by sea, which was his navy, which were hundreds of ships. And what he did was, he had his eyes set on Marathon, where his father was killed, and Athens. So, what was he to do? Because he was told by Artemis, he was told, don't do it. Your father made a mistake, you're going to make exactly the same mistake, but on a larger scale. Herodotus claims that Ahasuerus planned to invade all of Europe and reduce the entire world into one empire. This Xerxes was the perfect salesperson. He had everybody eating out of their hand. He pumped himself out so much that the people believed him, that they would follow him through the gates of hell, as it were. And Artabanus said, please don't do this. Forget it. Yes, I know that you've lost a father, but don't do this. But he wasn't going to have anything of that. And you can see from the map there, just the advances of it. You can see there, there's the Salamis, and his boats left from there and came down through the straits there, and they met up at the cove called Salamis. And his troops, as you could see, they had gone from there and have gone up over the Hellespont and moved all the way down, and then they came down to Thermopylae. Everything was going according to plan. Except he had not taken into consideration a few factors. One, he had not taken into consideration 300 Spartan soldiers. And just those 300 soldiers had picked a spot at Thermopylae, which is called the Hot Gates, a narrow channel. You can see at Salamis. What's so interesting about this, brothers and sisters, is this has to be the hand of God. Because at this section here, a freak storm comes and almost destroys 60% of his entire naval fleet. And the balance go down to Thermopylae. And then you have these 300 Spartans with the first wave of 10,000 troops approaching them. And when the Persians came, the Persians said, "Lay down your weapons." And the reply by the Spartans were, "Come and get them." And they had this unique facility of locking their shields. You can see there that little gap that they had locked up. And they waited for them. And when they attacked, in fact, Xerxes could not believe it. He actually waited for 4 days before he attacked, because he was up on the mountaintop. The Persians said, "Our arrows will darken the sky." And then the Spartans said, "That's okay, then we'll fight in the shade." And that's the kind of valor these men had. As a last resort, he sends in his immortals, his personal bodyguards, called immortals, because if one died, there was immediately someone else that could take his place. But their shields were locked together. You could not penetrate that. Do you know that Xerxes sent wave after wave after wave of Persians? And after 3 days, the Spartans had lost 5 men. The Persians had lost in excess of 20,000. They were a fighting machine. And they would have held them even longer had it not been for the fact that a traitor revealed to Xerxes that there was a hidden mountain pass that he could go around and they could flank them from the rear. And that's how the 300 Spartans sacrificed their life. But the interesting thing is that they had made it abundantly clear that they would die for that, because it gave sufficient time for the Athenians and for all the Grecians to gather together and to get their army together. And so, the night becomes worse for Xerxes, because the 40% of the fleet that arrives at Salamis. Now you see the smaller boats? Those were all the Spartans and the Grecian boats, and those were all the big boats. And what they did was the Grecians tricked them, because they came in and they got them to follow them around, but there was another group waiting hidden on the other side. So as soon as they came round, the Spartans just turned to the left and the Persians were in the middle. Now what was so different about this? Well, one, the Persian ships were big, you can see by the size. The Spartan ships and the Grecian ships were very small, geared to maneuver very quickly, with a massive battering ram on front. Effectively, they would row and ram, and in the sheer brilliance of the fighters would jump on board and destroy everybody. While Xerxes sat on a hill, he watched in horror as his entire naval fleet went to the bottom of the ocean. And from that point onwards, he was a doomed man, because he went to Plataea, and the Spartans and all the Grecians who had retreated, regrouped, came and absolutely massacred him. He lost close to 300,000 men in one battle. So, what on earth has this got to do with Esther? It's because you got God moving in this. It's because here was a man that said, I'm the perfect salesman. Not anymore. You know, the proverb says, pride goeth down before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Fact, Romans 13 verse 1 says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God, and the powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. You see, as far as Xerxes was concerned, he was going to absolutely level the whole of Europe. But God had other plans. Because in Daniel chapter 2, when Daniel was called to Nebuchadnezzar, and he reveals to them the structure, that the king of Babylon was his head of gold, and there will be after thee the Medo-Persians. Hey, presto. We're talking about Xerxes here, but prior to that it was Cyrus. Then Darius Hestispus, and now Xerxes. But what was brewing out of all of this was a young man called Alexander the Great. And what would happen out of this, even though Alexander the Great came some time back, that he would absolutely admire Leonidas, who was the Spartan king that sacrificed his life. Take a look at what Isaiah 46 verse 9 says. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel will stand, and I will do my pleasure. Well, Xerxes may have thought that he was going to honor himself, and he was going to do everybody's pleasure. But that was not God's plan. God had foreordained that this would happen. You know, the interesting thing about Alexander the Great? Just take a look at the shields. Look familiar? Do you remember the Spartans? He admired the Spartans. And most of their military tactics, he incorporated in his military. And there's never been a battle person, a warrior, according to the historians, greater than Alexander the Great. In fact, they say even up to this very day, the military still uses some of his tactics. He admired Leonidas, because without Leonidas, Sparta and Greece would not have existed. So was it Leonidas, or was it the hand of God? Well, you see, if Xerxes had trampled Greece, the chances of Greece rising to power would have been zero. But God says, this matter is by the decree of the watchers, and a demand by the word of the holy ones, to intend that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the bases of men. And so, when we look at the timeline, we will see that Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, defeats the Greeks at Thermopylae, but later, when it says 479, it's late 478, early 479, because 479 is his 7th year in power, and that is the year that he marries Esther, well, makes her queen. Because it tells you there, Esther becomes queen. It says 478, it shouldn't be that. And so we've gone in a full circle now, and we're coming back to the place where we were in the first talk. So we can see that God never just brought the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Grecians, the Romans, all in one go. Sequential history fits God's purpose. Because in Scripture we have the sure word of prophecy. You know, this king, Xerxes, he was a very ambitious king. What he wanted was Greece at all cost. Ambition drove him because he wanted Greece. He needed it. There was an axe to grind. But God turned him back. And now he's back in Persia with a young lady called Esther, who has been put there for the exact purpose of preservation. Because if you look at the theme for Ezra, it is reconstruction. If you look at the theme of Esther, it is reconstruction and protection from the world. Protection from extermination. So he loses at Plataea, and so we at this time frame now that we've got a little bit of the history behind us, we're at the time frame that we spoke of when the Jews first left, when they first left Babylon and went through to Jerusalem. Now, I brought this back up again because you remember we discussed in the previous talks those two words about them. Because when the Jews left, when Shazbazzar, when Zerubbabel, well, I believe he's the same person, and when Jeshua, when they left, there were those referred to as about them who stayed behind. And what actually happened was that those whose God had raised their spirit went through to take on the enormous task of rebuilding the temple of God. And so, they went through a few lessons in their life. Those people, specifically Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the priests and the Levites, etc., that were there. And what we have now is a situation that we are looking specifically at those people, because the story has moved from Jerusalem in that 58-year period. It's moved now back to Persia. And we are now considering those people who've decided to, well, we are here. It's pointless us going there. Besides, I'm not very good with tools. I like my comfort. It's a 900-kilometer journey. Far too difficult. I'll stay here. Besides, I'm giving them financial advice and financial assistance. Do you know what the two words about them actually are? It's quite amazing because I just took the time to look at it this afternoon. It comes from two words, Hebrew words, sabiv, which means area round about. And the second word, them, is hem, which means as many more as. So, what's significant about that? Well, actually, it occurs only 10 times in the entire Bible. One place where it occurs twice is the reading that we did yesterday, brothers and sisters. 2 Kings chapter 17. And take a look what it says. And they rejected his statutes and his covenants that he made with their fathers, and his testimonies, which he testified against them, and they followed vanity, and became vain, and went after the nations that were about them, concerning whom Yahweh had charged them, that they should not do like them. The other one is in Ezekiel chapter 28. And Ezekiel chapter 28 says this, it occurs twice there. And there shall be no more a pricking briar unto the house of Israel, nor a grieving thorn of all that are round about them, that despise them. And they shall know that I am Adonai Yahweh. Thus saith Adonai Yahweh, when I shall have gathered the house of Israel from the people among whom they are scattered, and shall be sanctified in them, in the sight of the heathen, sight of the nations, then shall they dwell in their land that I have given to my servant Jacob, and they shall dwell safely therein, and they shall build houses and plant vineyards. Yea, they shall dwell with confidence when I have executed judgment upon all those that despise them round about them. And they shall know that I am Yahweh their God. And the reason why I've taken the time to go over this in detail is this. Is because there are actually three words when God says that He wants them to turn to Him. Turn to me, He says, and I will turn to you. Because He was referring to those that were about them. Now let me just bear with me here for a moment. There are three Hebrew words. There is Shem Vav Bet, which is return, or turn to me, God says. There is Shavut and Mes Stuva. Now those are the three words that are sitting in that spiral there. The interesting thing about it is this, is that those three words only occur sequentially. In other words, God says, turn to me, which is the word Shem Vav Bet. But the next instance of that word, and the next instance of that word, in other words, the further you go in transliteration away from the root, the word Shem Vav Bet, the top one, means turn to me. Thereafter, it starts breaking down, because what it actually, the next word means wealth or fortune. And then the next word means falling away or apostasy. So what it's telling you is when God says to His children, don't be about them, don't stay in them, separate yourself and come to me, because that's what the word actually means when He says turn to me. It is in the Hebrew lexicon, it means to separate and return to God. So what He's saying to them is, you're going to be shown a lesson. You decided not to go from Babylon. You decided not to go to Jerusalem and help those. You're in your comfort zone here. Something is going to happen that's going to turn your life around. And that is the patience and mercy of God. Even though there's a reason why I believe that no mention of God is and no mention of prayer in the whole of Esther. Oh yeah, they were in sackcloth and ashes and they fasted. No mention of prayer. No mention of God. Because God hid His face from them. But God was present there. Because there's a reason that was looming. You see, what was being brought about in this particular lesson was this. Well, it's simple. You start there. You start off with return to me. If you don't do that, you're chasing after fortune, and eventually you'll go into apostasy. Well, it seems a bit of a stretch, but just watch this. Separation, apostasy. In one Hebrew word, says to you, return to me. If you don't, it's the next one down. If you don't, it's the next one down. He's saying, stay close to my chest. You know, to make things easier, just to put it like that. You see, God, apostasy, because that's what the word is, turn to me. Turn to me in the Greek Hebrew sense means separation. 2 words down, you've got shavut and meshuvah. You've got those 2 Hebrew words, meaning in the middle, you've got those who are about them in their comfort zone, and you've got the other side of it, which is apostasy. And basically what the word is actually telling you is this, is that if you're in the middle there, the about them people at that time, the closer you move to apostasy, the further you move away from separation. And that's what the lesson that God was trying to bring through to the people who chose to remain in Babylon. Just take a look at what the next slide tells us. Deuteronomy 17. Then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them. Why? Verse 18. And I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evils which they have wrought, in that they are turned to other gods. Chapter 32 at verse 20. And he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end shall be, for they are a very froward generation, children in whom is no faith. In effect, he was telling those people back in Babylon who chose to stay that they were mingling truth and error. And to me, that is a bit of a understanding as to why God is not directly and openly mentioned. But you know that he is. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but if you've heard of an acrostic, what an acrostic is a poem, it's a word puzzle. I've put it up there so you can read it. Or other composition of certain letters in each line, form, or word of words. In other words, a particular character of words make up a word. Esther chapter 1 verse 20. The verse that says, it and all the wives shall give. Do you see there? You got YHVH. Haman's treasury of key Bible words. That is the word Yahweh. Yud He Chaveh. You mix it up in any other way, it's not Yahweh. The interesting thing about it is don't worry about the numbers above. The only way you'll actually pick that up is by actually looking at the manuscript. Because the moment it goes from the manuscript into transliteration, the English translators will reshuffle the words to make it make sense to me and you. Because we say, bring that cat here, not cat bring here, if you understand what I'm saying. So in the original Hebrew, if you take the first letter, it means Yahweh. Here's another one. In 5 verse 4, let the king and Haman come today. The same verse that Haman is being invited to the feast. And what's he say? Oh, you know, even Queen Vashti, she only invited me to come to the party. Yahweh is bringing it to pass. Look at the next one. The next one is at 5 verse 13, where he looks at Mordecai is not reverencing him. And he's just been elevated to power. And he says, this means nothing to me because he's not reverencing me. Yahweh His name is involved in that move. But the most damning one for Haman is this, is when he is in the room with Queen Esther and she's just accused him in the presence of Xerxes. And Xerxes storms out the room in anger. And it says that he was terrified, Haman, because he could see that evil was determined against him by the king, Yahweh. But there's one more that I believe conclusively proves that God is involved in all the actions, even though they were a people who had turned aside from God. Yes, they had turned aside from God, and they were not following God to his precise law. There was a bigger picture here, because God had preordained that the work would continue in Jerusalem. And there was going to be a man that would come on and pray on the gullibility and the absolute compulsiveness of a king that acted first and thought later. And that is the fact of Esther verse 13 of chapter 3, where it is decided that all the Jews of the nations would be destroyed, killed, perish on the 13th day of the 12th month. Has anybody heard of gematria? It's the Hebrew calculator. Every word in the Hebrew alphabet has got a numeric value. So if you take 13 and 12, 1, 3, 1, 2. It could have been any other day. But remember that they cast lots for almost months. And they come up with that day. And if you put the gematria calculator, it means the Ark of the Covenant. 1, 3, 1, 2. God was involved in this. Do you know that word, the spoil of them for prey? Do you know where it occurs? Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 13. Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey? To carry away silver and gold? To take away cattle and goods? To take a great spoil? That's what Haman said. Is that what I want you to do is on one day you destroy every Jew and then we take their booty. That's exactly what it said in Ezekiel chapter 38. And you know what happens to the nation, to the Goguen power that comes against Israel? They are destroyed. So briefly, just to show you that we are actually in the correct time zone. Do you remember in the first talk we looked at the fact that if it was a concurrent time frame, as some would believe, not as sequential as I believe, then what would actually happen is, irrespective of which method you use, the most conservative age for Esther would turn out to be 57. That's what her age would be. But when Esther comes before the king, we read, so it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together into Shushan the palace to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house, to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the woman. And then we read, and the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house, and he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the woman. The English Standard Version says, and the young woman pleased him and won his favor. The lemma in the Hebrew means a young unmarried girl. So what I'm trying to say is the chances of Esther being in a concurrent time frame and being 57 years old doesn't fit with that. Nor does it fit with the fact that she would have to fall into an adolescence period, which is between 10 and 19. And most Hebrew scholars believe almost split down the middle. Some believe she was 15, some believe she was 80. I don't know how they got that, but anyway, we'll go with it. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. That's 7 years later. A king that you would hope has been humbled and has a little bit more sense in his head and doesn't react so compulsively when he's asked something to make a decision on something. Well, let's come to Mordecai then. Put the king and Esther on hold for 1 minute. You see, because it was in those days while Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Now, when it tells you he sat in the king's gate, Mordecai was a man of position and honor and authority. Take a look what Proverbs says. Now therefore hearken unto me, O you children, for blessed are they that keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise and refuse it not. Blessed is the man that heareth me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the posts of my doors. For whoso findeth me findeth life, and shall obtain favor of Yahweh. But he that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul. All that hate me love death. And the interesting thing is that in Revelation, we are told that the gatekeepers will always be there and the gates will never be closed. There are such hidden lessons here that God, Yahweh, was at work in this. Even though Mordecai, in my humble opinion, and Esther weren't quite the shiny example of what God was actually asking his children to convey in their life, but they were vehicles to God's end. So we get to our friend Haman. Haman, actually the name means alone or solitary, well disposed. This is probably more like him. A rioter, the rager, their tumult. In other words, a loud noise. His father was Hamadatha, which means he that troubles the law. And when it says double, means double trouble. He was opposer of justice or the law. Now, why is Haman brought into this picture? I'll tell you why I believe Haman is brought into this picture. It's because Saul was told to go and destroy all the Amalekites. And what does he do? He took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive. He utterly destroyed everything else, but he spared Agag, and would not utterly destroy everything, but anything that he considered was vile, he destroyed. And do you remember what happens when he comes and he says, "Blessed art thou of the Lord"? Samuel says, "Did you complete Yahweh's instructions?" "Oh, yes, I did." What's that bleating in my ears? "Oh, no, we kept that for Yahweh." So what does Samuel say? Then came the word of Yahweh unto Samuel, saying, It repenteth me that I have set up Samuel to be king, for he is turned back. That word, turned back, is the same word in Genesis chapter 3, where it says, Through toiling of the ground thou shalt eat bread. Why? Till thou returnest to the ground. That word returneth is the same word turn back. because dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. What God was saying is, you've turned back from following me. You have not performed my commandments. What did Adam and Eve do? One simple instruction. You can eat of all the fruit of the garden, but that particular tree there, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat of it, for in the day you eat thereof, thou shalt surely die. He's turned back. He's put himself in a place where Adam and Eve were. And it grieved Samuel about that. And Saul says to him, Blessed be thou of the Lord. I've performed the commandment. I'm confident. I've done everything that God's told me to do. And Samuel said, Hath Yahweh as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of Yahweh? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. You know, when we look down at Esther chapter 3 and verse 1, after these things did Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above all the princes that were with him, and all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai, to his honor, bowed not, nor did him reverence. You know, what it's telling us is this, and that comes back from last week. It is not sufficient just to express a belief in his power. This belief has to be actively shown. You see, the thing was that Mordecai, he was the descendant of Kish, the last name mentioned, who was a Benjamite. And there it is, there's Kish there. And there is in Esther. Now in Shusha in the palace, there was a certain Jew, his name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish. So, Haman was going to be the fulfillment of a commandment given by God that should have been done by Saul. Saul was told to destroy all the Amalekites. He didn't do it. And here we have a situation brewing where Mordecai would pick up that baton and do the job, because God's will be done. You know, you take a look at Haman's attitude. It tells us in verse 3, Then the king's servants which were in the king's gate said unto Mordecai, Why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spoke daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman, to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. And then, put this in bold, for he had told them that he was a Jew. Bang! They destroyed my people. You see, he was transgressing. He was not listening. He specifically wasn't listening to me. And I've been set at a level above everybody. And why? Because he's a Jew. You know, the interesting thing is that Haman saw that he did not bow, nor did him reverence. Then was Haman full of wrath. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for he had showed him the people of Mordecai. They actually showed him and said, yeah, that one. They're all Jews, all of them. Oh, I hate these people. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom. Do you think that includes Jerusalem? where Zerubbabel and Jeshua are? Well, that's the kingdom. There's Jerusalem. The hammer's coming down. According to Haman, I'll get rid of them all. But you see, they had banked on one important thing. God will not be mocked. God says that I've made plans for that, for my future king who will sit on Zion. Look what he says in Jeremiah chapter 31. Thus saith Yahweh, which giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon of the stars for a light by night, which divideth the sea when the waves thereof roar. Yahweh of armies is his name. If those ordinances depart from me, saith Yahweh, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever. Thus saith Yahweh, even if heaven above can be measured, and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I will also cast off all the seed of Israel for all they have done, saith Yahweh. And then he says, for thus saith Yahweh of armies, after the glory hath he set me upon the nations which spoileth you. For he that touches you touches the apple of his eye. Haman had just come face to face in obstruction with the plan and purpose of God. You know, it's interesting that when it spoke of against them, those two words. Remember when Zerubbabel and Jeshua came to Israel? The first thing they did was they built an altar. Why? Because they were scared of the people. And then they got over that fear because they had confidence that God was going to protect them. How long did it take before the adversaries came in and put a stop to that? And do you know those people that it's talking about in 2 Kings chapter 17? They were the about them people that were migrated from the Samaria and other places into the Jerusalem region. And they put them on hold for 16 years. They put God's work on hold until God brought them about by Haggai and Zechariah and lifted them up and told them, get off your butts and do God's work. And here we have a little pimple, a little toad called Haman that says, I'm going to kill every Jew, including those that have gone and toiled at Jerusalem. Well, Haman's just come face to face with God's word. One outcome. See you later, Haman. You see, the problem comes in is that cost lots. Which month will it be? Which will be the most opportunist time? The interesting thing was, when he cast the lots, it gave the Jews and Mordecai 12 months to prepare. 12 months. You know what Proverbs 16 says? The lot is cast into the lap, but the whole disposing thereof is of Yahweh. He was casting lots. Thought he had it all under control. He'd be able to walk around and gloat while he's seeing everybody panicking. Because that's what they were. He tells the king, there's a certain people in this kingdom of yours. Their laws are diverse from all the people. They neither keep the king's laws, therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it to the king's treasury. You know the interesting thing about that? He gave no further explanation. And the king was whipping his hand off to give him his ring. Why? He'd just come from a massive defeat. His treasury was in ruins. Do you know how much money 10,000 talents is in those days? Herodotus says the entire turnover for the whole Persian Empire annually was 15,000 talents of silver. He was offering him 2/3 of an entire country's annual turnover. This was a man with an axe to grind. Absolutely. He had taken God head on. So, was he well disposed? I don't think so. Was he double trouble? You bet your life he was double trouble. You see, they call the king scribes. And the king hastily gives him his ring. What will happen? You know, Proverbs once again says this: he that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him. He didn't even ask Haman, who are these people? Oh, I don't recall any insurrection in this place. You sure you're right? 10,000 talents of silver. That's a lot of coin. Here's my ring. Go for it. Look what he says. And the letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, to cause to perish. Pretty self-explanatory, eh? When you look at the Hebrew, it means to utterly destroy, to utterly perish. In effect, as far as Haman was concerned, strike 3, you're out. You're all dead. You're history. You Jews, I hate you. But one thing he'd overlooked was the Ark of the Covenant, showing that God was working there. And you know what happens? He thought Haman, struck 3, you're out. But what happens when 3 unstoppable commands meet one superior, unmovable force, which is God? What happens? As far as Haman was concerned, done and dusted. The law would go forth. It's a decree. It cannot be changed. The Jews are as good as dead. You see, the posts went out, being hastened by the king's command, and the decree was given in Shushan. But the city of Shushan was perplexed. People walked around as if they were in a dream, in a trance. They couldn't believe it. They were all going to be executed. And what does Haman do? And the king? Well, I've got 10,000 talents of silver. The king and Haman sat down to drink. Business as usual. But guess what? The same was with God, because he was just about to feel the rock power come straight on his head. And that power would grow, because you see, although that had gone out, the command to every single province of his kingdom, although it had gone out, there's absolutely no way that God was going to let a little man destroy Jerusalem. Because in God's mind, Ezra, who had not gone yet to Jerusalem, was waiting to go. Nehemiah was waiting, because reconstruction preservation, rebuild. The themes of the 3 books. So, where are we going to go with this? I had to give you the historical background because it just makes so much sense when you can fit them into their particular orders. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the box office premiere, the rise and fall of Haman the Agagite. And we're going to see whether his plans come to fruition or whether God will be all and in all. You know, one of the lessons, that I've learned through this particular talk tonight and the other talks is that God is extremely patient with us. He will work with us. He will guide us. He will nurture us. Ultimately, to show us His abounding mercy, long-suffering, and truth. Because God, He wants us all in the kingdom. He wants every single one of us to be there. And that's why He is slowly leading us and building us up. He tells us to come out of her, my people. Touch not the unclean thing, which we've looked at through the last few talks. It's whether we take the strength and the opportunity to turn to Him, so that He will turn to us, so that He will strengthen us, so that He will encourage us, and He will uplift us, so that we can carry on the work in truth, in an attitude of not being beside them, not being part of them, not becoming them, but being one with Christ and with God.